down at your arm for a second. Just look at it. Now ask yourself something you've probably never actually asked. Why is it that color? Now, why do people have different skin colors? You already know the textbook answer. Sun, melanin, blah, blah. I mean, why that specific journey? Because here's what almost nobody tells you. The shade on your arm right now is the end result of one of the most aggressive biological rewrites your ancestors ever went through. And it happened way faster and way more recently than you think. You've probably pictured this as some slow, gentle fade. Humans wandering out of Africa and over hundreds of thousands of years gradually, gently lightening up like a photo left in the sun. That picture is basically wrong. And once you see why it's wrong, you're not going to look at your own skin the same way again.
Okay, before we get to the wrong part, we need a quick primer because none of this makes sense without one tiny biological fact. Your skin has this pigment in it called melanin. Think of melanin like tiny built-in sunglasses sitting inside your cells. The more of it you have, the darker your skin looks, and the more UV radiation it blocks before that radiation can reach the DNA sitting underneath. That's it. That's the whole mechanism. More melanin, more blocking. Less melanin, less blocking. Simple dial, big consequences. Because UV radiation is basically tiny invisible bullets constantly raining down from the sun, and those bullets damage DNA. Enough damage in the wrong spot over enough time and you get cancer. So dark skin, evolutionarily speaking, is a shield. And near the equator, where our species began, that shield was constantly permanently necessary. Every single early human everywhere on Earth wore that shield. There was no other option on the table yet. So here's the puzzle. If dark skin is this fantastic, battle-tested shield, why would evolution ever throw it away? That's the actual mystery. Not why did some people get lighter skin, but why would something so useful get abandoned at all? And the answer to that puzzle is where things get genuinely strange. So let's start stacking the evidence. First piece. Around 70,000 years ago, give or take, small groups of humans started drifting out of Africa, and eventually some of them ended up much farther north into places like Scandinavia, Siberia, the British Isles. And in those places, something happens to sunlight that most people never think about. It gets weaker, not less dangerous. Weaker. It hits the ground at a lower angle. It passes through way more atmosphere. And for months at a time in winter, there's barely any of it at all. So the very thing that made dark skin necessary in Africa, that intense direct UV, mostly disappears up north, which means the shield stops being useful. But, and this is the part people skip, that doesn't automatically mean it becomes harmful. A shield that's no longer needed isn't the same as a shield that's actively hurting you. So what turned not needed into actively dangerous? That's piece 2. Piece 2 is vitamin D. And this is honestly the part of the story that deserves way more credit than it usually gets. Your skin doesn't just block sunlight. It also uses a specific slice of it, UVB, to manufacture vitamin D, which your body needs to absorb calcium properly. No vitamin D, weak bones. In kids, that shows up as a condition where bones actually bend and deform. In adult women, it can distort the pelvis badly enough to make childbirth lethal. Read that again. Not uncomfortable, lethal. So now picture a very dark-skinned person living through a gray, sunless Scandinavian winter 40,000 years ago. Their melanin is still doing its old job perfectly, blocking UV, except up there, there's barely any UV worth blocking. And what little there is, they desperately need to let in. Their skin can't tell the difference between dangerous sun and sun I actually need. It just blocks everything out of habit, out of evolutionary muscle memory. And slowly, that habit starts costing lives. And here's where researchers found something that quietly reroutes the whole story. For a long time, the assumption was that pale skin spread across Europe gradually, keeping pace with migration north over tens of thousands of years. Then, teams working with ancient DNA, sequencing genetic material pulled directly from skeletons thousands of years old, found something that didn't fit that timeline at all. A skeleton discovered in England, roughly 10,000 years old, nicknamed after the gorge it was found in, turned out to have genetic markers pointing to dark or at least dark to medium skin. 10,000 years after humans had already been living in Britain for millennia. Dark skin in Britain. That's not a footnote.
That quietly breaks the slow, gradual fade story completely.
So if it wasn't gradual, what was it? This is the fact I've been holding back. So let's just say it straight, no hedging. Widespread pale skin across Northern Europe is, in evolutionary terms, almost embarrassingly recent. We're talking roughly the last 6,000 to 8,000 years. Out of a 300,000-year human story, the classic pale European look shows up in maybe the final 2% of it. If human history were a 24-hour clock, pale skin as we picture it today walks in around 11:53 p.m. Take a breath with me here, because that number tends to land hard the first time you actually sit with it. It means something most people assume is ancient and permanent, a defining, almost primal marker of an entire region's population, is, biologically, newer than farming, newer than pottery in a lot of places, newer than several other things you'd assume predated easily.
So what flipped the switch that fast? This is where the story gets genuinely clever, because the trigger wasn't the cold. The trigger was dinner, specifically the invention of farming. Before agriculture, people were eating a lot of fish, organ meat, wild game, foods naturally loaded with vitamin D, meaning their diet was quietly backing up whatever their skin managed to produce. Once populations shifted to farming, their plates filled with grain instead. Wheat, barley, that kind of thing. Almost none of it carries vitamin D. So overnight, in evolutionary terms, people lost their dietary safety net at the exact same moment their skin was already struggling to make enough vitamin D from that weak northern sun. Two problems stacked on top of each other, and suddenly, lighter skin wasn't just a mild advantage anymore. It was the difference between a healthy pregnancy and a fatal one. That's the kind of pressure evolution moves fast for. And there's a second ingredient nobody usually mentions: population density. Farming communities weren't small roaming bands of 30 or 40 people anymore. They were villages, hundreds of people, connected to other villages. A helpful mutation spreading through a tight, dense, interconnected population moves like a rumor through a small office. It moves through a scattered hunting band the way a rumor moves through people who barely see each other. Same mutation, wildly different speed, purely because of how crowded and connected the population got. Put those two things together, the diet collapse and the population density, and you get an evolutionary sprint instead of a stroll.
Here's a detail that tends to genuinely surprise people, and it makes the whole picture even weirder in a good way. There isn't one single pale skin gene. Skin tone is controlled by dozens of different genes working together. And here's the kicker. East Asian populations and European populations both evolved lighter skin independently, using largely different sets of genetic changes to get there. Different starting points, different genetic routes, same destination. In biology, that's called convergent evolution. And honestly, it's one of the strongest signals you can get that a trait genuinely mattered for survival. When nature reinvents the same solution from scratch more than once on opposite sides of the planet, that's not a coincidence. That's a pattern nature kept discovering because the payoff was too big to ignore.
Now, let's zoom out, because this is where the story stops being just biology and starts being something a lot heavier. For most of recorded history, humans took this, a purely local, purely practical, purely accidental adaptation to sunlight and diet, and turned it into a justification for hierarchy, for ownership of other human beings, for entire systems of law and violence. An adjustment your ancestors' bodies made to survive weak winter sun and a grain-heavy diet became, centuries later, the excuse for some of the worst things humans have ever done to each other. There is genuinely nothing in the biology of skin color that supports any of that. It's not a ranking system. It's not a marker of ability or worth. It is, at its core, a leftover thermostat setting, your body's best guess, encoded generations ago, about how much sun protection the place your ancestors happened to live in actually required. That's the whole story. Everything built on top of it afterward was added by us, not by evolution. So go back to your arm one more time. Whatever shade it isn't a coincidence, and it definitely isn't a hierarchy. It's a record, a quiet, physical record of exactly where your ancestors stood, what they ate, and how much sun fell on them, written slowly into your DNA over tens of thousands of years, with the final major edit happening embarrassingly recently, right around the time someone first figured out how to plant a seed on purpose. Every shade of human skin on this planet passed through that same filter, that same sun, that same set of trade-offs. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If you'd been born somewhere else, under a completely different sky, do you think your body would have made the exact same bet?